Hello, BookFest 2021. My name is Evan Witmer, and I'm a surrealist fantasy author here in the Penn State area. I used to be a student here in undergrad, and I stayed around for grad school, and then I stayed around for my second job, finally moving to Buffalo. But uh, I am still here in the State College area, and I am still writing surrealist fantasy short stories. They are all up online for free at oddfiction.com. At the end of each year, I take down the 10 most recent stories and I self publish them in short story collections with a really weird, surrealist framing device. The first year, I did Pages from the Pizza Crows. The framing device is that a friendly crow begins eating pieces of my breakfast in the morning, and in return, he starts giving me gifts. Um, I find out that by feeding him different foods, I get different rewards in exchange. And by feeding him pizza, I get pages from short stories. One of those short stories is about a bear that spies on people in the woods to write his romance novels. And for a nice reading, I would like to read you about how this bear came to become sentient. I've idolized the New York Times bestseller since I first gained the consciousness level of a human being. Before that, I had the simpler life goals of your average Ursus Americanus. I wanted food. Living right outside of Fort Collins, my best choice for sustenance was to walk onto the nearby campus and raid the dumpsters and garbage cans for scraps. At first, I was gaining most of my nutrition from pizza crusts and chicken bones outside of a dollar slice pizzeria, but over time, I found better options. The key was to go where the rich kids were, Fraternity Row. The selection here was far more vast. Sammy had discarded latkes and brisket, Knack had half-eaten pastels and chavitos, and Adelphicos had just boatloads of bougie mac and cheese. I was surprised no one ever called the cops on me that whole period of culinary delight. In hindsight, I believe any witnesses to my trespassing were most likely turned off with the idea of cops snooping around their frat houses, especially given the selection of drugs I found on their premises. It was not uncommon that I find myself higher drunk after ingesting the frat trash. Their foods were often laced with hallucinogens, uppers, and downers. At first, it just made me dizzy, remedied by a quick nap in a shady spot in the bushes. But eventually, my curiosity had permanent effects. I was munching on brownies at the bottom of a compost heap outside of AGR when I noticed the usual effects of ingesting stimulants. I felt a numbness in my nose followed by sparkles in my ears. I expected to feel my heart rate go up, but instead the sensation in my chest was focused mainly around my lungs. I was breathing rapidly, consuming massive amounts of oxygen to support some change brewing in my anatomy. It was extra support for a growing brain. Whatever cocktail of drugs was in those brownies had an unusual reaction with the neurological chemistry of an American black bear. I found myself slowly breaking apart my thin stream of consciousness into various aspects. Setting, climate, time of day all became recognizable from the usual pinhole of light and sound I used to follow. Fresh food suddenly became distinct from garbage, and I felt utterly sickened by my previous behavior. I suddenly realized how stupid I was acting, trotting around, a wild animal, in the middle of the human domain. I had levels of self consciousness for the first time, and it was urging me to flee back into the safety of the woods. From then on, my ever growing intelligence commandeered my body for obtaining massive amounts of information. I felt compelled to spy on humans that came into my forest in order to better understand how to use this big, curvy brain of mine. The notes I took were originally just for learning purposes, but eventually the idea came to publish after I came across several encounters with a man named Peanut. Peanut is Peanut due to the handfuls of trail mix he chews incessantly while painting. Peanut paints almost every day in different quarters of my domain, finding interesting little landscapes that I never appreciated, even when I was part of the picture. I learned from watching him the importance of not just creating, but also the joy of sharing said creations. I tried this simple pleasure myself by stealing various cell phones from sleeping campers and posting my notes on novellas as novellas online. It's been the most thrilling use of my newfound intelligence I've yet to discover. The other book I have came out this year is Digest 10 Short Stories by Convicted and Plausible People Eaters. The framing device for this one is each short story is written by a different author. They're all fictional cannibals. Before each short story is a fictional biography of said cannibals. Now, a lot of people have wondered if they were all essentially evil, gross cannibals, but there's actually good cannibals too, some benign ones. And I'd like to share one of those benign ones, my favorite, Bonnie Bride. Um, It was the summer of 1986, and Bonnie Bride had just put together a rebellious group of ex-debutantes to form her soon-to-be hit rock band, Oroborus. They had serious talent and a unique sound, but the only thing holding them back were demographics and expectations. Oroborus was an all-female band operating in a male-dominated rock scene. If they were going to be taken seriously by the scouting R&R execs, they were going to need to be a bit of a stage gimmick to capture their attention. While they were invited to play in '86's Limpskin, a rock festival showcasing South Beach's up-and-coming talent, Bonnie Bride took it upon herself to come up with the perfect visual representation of what they were about. We're Ouroboros, so my first thought is that we gotta do something with snakes, explained Bonnie. We tried wearing snakeskin jackets and shoes, but that just made us look like girls playing dress-up. Then I thought, let's throw live snakes at the crowd. But that's not original enough. Murray did the same stunt with a bunch of eels just last year. So then, I'm out of ideas. I'm feeling like a failure. And then our keyboardist stands up, this young girl, Cassie Gray, only 16 at the time, and she says, Bonnie, an Ouroboros is constantly eating itself. We've got to eat ourselves. Recorded cases of autocannibalism have arisen from desperate situations where there is no other food source available except eating oneself. In these strange circumstances, practitioners tend to start by devouring their outer extremities, starting with the fingers. Then they work their way down the arms and legs until there's nothing left but stumps. If by then still no change has come to their predicament, they'll start to gnaw away at their faces, chopping off their noses and ears, maybe even their own tongue. Then, if they still have the will to survive, they will resort to genital mutilation, followed by shearing off pieces of their abdomen. None of this seemed ideal for the members of Ouroboros, who all very much enjoyed having 10 fingers and toes and preferred to keep their pretty faces intact. But they knew if they could find some part of themselves to consume, there was no doubting how hardcore they truly were. Their show would automatically become legendary. So they did their research and discovered a list of internal organs that one could live without. The most common, and least life-changing, to have removed was the appendix. We're all young girls. I mean real young. Besides Mary, we all grew up with a silver spoon out in Halea. None of us knew how to get the black market surgery in Tijuana. Our best option was to get our appendix removed legitimately, and the easiest way to do that was to give ourselves appendicitis. Appendicitis can be caused by worms or cancer, but these weren't options the band members were comfortably exploring. They were too risky, and overall, there was such a simpler option. The most common cause of appendicitis, an appendocolith, or appendix stone. It's a calcified fecal deposit that gets stuck in your appendix, and they're not hard to create. All the girls needed to do was get themselves as constipated as possible. To plug themselves up, they all took copious amounts of iron pills, courtesy of their anemic guitarist. The idea worked a tad too well, however, and all of them were quickly rushed to the hospital due to severe abdominal pain. Here, 4 of the 5 girls had their appendices removed, while the remaining member had a portion of their liver lobbed off. The iron toxicity had accidentally poisoned the drummer's internal organs, but she persevered and, in the end, still got something to eat. Jamie was the last one of us to leave the hospital, and that was just a day before Limpkin. The doctors didn't want us going on stage, of course, but we assured them there'd be no drugs or partying afterward. We just wanted to put on a good show. The girls kept their promise, and after they played their first song, Cave Baby, their stage crew brought out their jars and the ladies explained what was inside. They then poured out the formaldehyde and popped the organs into their mouths. They each popped open a can of wild cherry Pepsi and washed the slippery little blobs down their throat. Bonnie claims that her appendix mixed with the soda ended up tasting like a candied shrimp. So, both these books are available on Amazon. Pages from the Pizza Grows also just had its audiobook come out. So there's a couple different ways you can read. Next year's book will be called How to Burn This Book, and before each short story will be a reason to burn that short story. Yeah, keep in touch. You can find me at oddfiction.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at @fictionodd. Thank you, and have a good rest of the festival.